Yes, and we are live. I'm here with my friend Craig. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you tonight?
Doing very well. Nice to meet you. We met on Twitter, but I don't know that much about you. I got a couple little hints from you, and it sounds very exciting, and I'm very excited to dig into it. But first, I always ask my guests to just give us the background, the faith journey. How did you grow up? How were you raised? And what were the bumps along the road? And I think you have an interesting story to tell us, but you can pick and choose the highlights along the faith journey. Okay, go for it.
Okay, and throw up some warning signs if I go too long. Um, I'm the oldest of four kids. My There's sort of two sets of kids, my brother and I, and then there's about a 15-year gap, and then there's two more. We were pretty nominal Catholics growing up. My parents both grew up in large Catholic families, but we were, I would say, pretty nominal Catholics until I was in my teens, and then my parents became very very involved in church and Medjugorje and all that kind of stuff, and sort of we all kind of went through a conversion together, I guess, even though we were always Catholic, but we became serious Catholics. And my parents became very involved in sort of the apparitions and sort of end times sort of stuff, and we just did some kind of weird things, but became very focused on our faith. Fast forward, ended up in the Latin Mass community for a while, sort of as a refuge from just the stuff that you see in Novus Ordo masses or had been seeing for a long time. And we were actually very active in the Latin Mass community. We were going to a fraternity of St. Peter Mass, and kind of through a set of circumstances, I was on the Scola, and I ended up attending a racquetball game between Bishop Chaput, who was he was bishop in South Dakota at the time, long ago, and one of the seminarians for the fraternity. And of course, Chaput never misses an opportunity to invite guys to the seminary. So he said, "You ever thought about the priesthood?" Well, not really. Certainly not diocesan. Um, but we got talking, and he invited me over, and next one thing led to another, and pretty soon I was in the seminary studying for the Diocese of Rapid City, South Dakota, under Chaput. So I spent 3 years in college seminary and was sort of very excited about that. I really enjoyed the seminary, the vocation, the idea of being a priest. But really, my junior year of college went through a real difficult struggle to the point where I felt God calling me to leave. It was a very difficult decision for me. It was a very difficult decision. Um, but I left, and soon thereafter started dating my wife, or who would become my wife, who was a college student as well, and we got married. Uh, I then went off to graduate school because there's nothing you can do with a philosophy degree, so I went on for further education, um, and did that. One of the things that is important to my journey is that, and I'm not even sure how I ended up on this topic, but my senior thesis was on Humani Vitae, and I spent a lot of time studying theology, the body, Humani Vitae. I don't know if Christopher West was a thing at that point in time. Maybe he was just coming on the scene. But I wrote my I wrote a senior paper on Humani Vitae, and some of the, I don't want to say gaps in it, but just some things that weren't very clear about it. So I actually had was sort of a critique of Humani Vitae in some ways. But one of the things that happened is one of my college professors, who was a Catholic woman in her 40s, um, she was one of my advisors, and she shared a story with me that she struggles. They were really at the point in life that I am now, which is in my mid 40s. They had their children, but you're sort of in that transition zone when it comes to fertility, and you're trying, becoming pregnant at our age is more difficult and sometimes life threatening, and natural family planning can become a very, very difficult thing for couples. And I remember thinking at that time that well, that'll never happen to me. You're just not doing it right or something like that. But um, sort of fast forward, my wife and I got married. Been, faithful Catholics ever since. We've been using natural family planning, but we have 9 children to show for our efforts or lack of efforts. Um, and I so for me, this lifestyle and the church's teachings when it comes to marriage and family and abstinence became a real sore subject for me, to the point where I was starting to question my faith because I either the teaching just can't be what it is, or it's so impossibly burdensome that no one's going to get to heaven. So I had this long-standing struggle with it, that ultimately led to a podcast, in part because I was so frustrated, that I thought someone needed to hear about it, and I didn't want to wait until I was 80 years old to say some things that, you know, just don't paint marriage or my marriage in a real great light necessarily. But I started talking to a buddy of mine, and we started having some really amazing conversations. He's a Catholic gentleman too. And I realized we had a lot of the same struggles and concerns. And we started talking, and then we started recording. And then those conversations led to conversations with our spouses that have literally transformed our marriages for the better. Not without some pain along the way. But so that's how my faith journey kind of led to our podcast. I Today I don't spend a lot of time in church politics so much. I wouldn't say I'm disinterested in it, but it's just I'm a busy guy. I got a professional career, 9 children. I just don't spend a lot of time worrying about the drama in the church so much anymore. But I care a lot about this, so I spend a lot of time podcasting and researching for it.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna dig into your podcast and your recovery from trad lifestyle or whatever it is, if that's appropriate to say that. And
It is.
but I just want to sort of ask a couple of more biographical questions first
Yeah.
about the parents, your wife, your 4 kids, any siblings you have, just to the extent that you're comfortable, of course, because it's none of my business. But I ask everyone these questions, and most people are free to, most people are happy to answer them. What's the story in terms of Catholicism and like the faith journey? Were any interesting stories, or do you have a relative who went a different path or something? Just to fill in the gaps a little bit. It's like everyone's Catholic, that's it, or what's the story?
So my parents are very, very. Um, I don't know if I would call. Yeah, I guess I would call them traditionalists. My dad is like he spends all his retirement days in church praying for me, probably.
Nice.
Uh,
Ask him to pray for me too. Go on.
yeah. So they're very, very religious. I have a brother that's a year younger than me, and he sort of continued on the trajectory that we had been. So he married a gal. They're very much into the Latin Mass traditionalist community. I think he has 13 kids, so I'm kind of a slacker compared to him. So he's really, very much into the traditionalist thing, and I'm not opposed to it, but that's I just didn't have a lot of fun anymore, and I just didn't have a lot of joy in my life, so that wasn't my thing. But we're very active. I mean, our kids go to Catholic school. My wife teaches, and but that's kind of where we're at right now. And then there's, like I said, there's a sort of a gap. There's about a 15-year gap, and I have a sister who's married. She has a couple of kids, and then I have a young brother, he's sort of the black sheep. I think he's away from the faith, although he's sort of come around. But you know, by the time my younger brother and sister, my parents were pretty, what's the word? I don't know if rigid is the right word, but just pretty hardcore ran a pretty tight ship. Not that they didn't when I was that age, but they really tightened down the shackles when my brother and sister came along. And my brother didn't thrive under that environment, and I think found it oppressive and went in a different direction. But my sister is, just kind of followed on that path and married a really nice guy. And I don't think they go to Latin mass, but they're kind of part of that community a little bit.
And thank you for that. And so what's the vibe like with your nine kids? Are they just they're too young to really express which direction they're headed, or some of them like fully embracing it, others a little bit less so? Like what's the vibe there?
So our oldest is 20, and our youngest is a year. So our oldest is 20. He's out of the house. He's in the military. Um, Gets to mass, holy days, things like that. But it's very tough to have an active faith life in the military where you're kind of on your own. There just isn't a strong support community unless you actively go out. So I would say he's Catholic, but I wouldn't say he's super enthusiastic about it at this point in time. And then we have a 18-year-old who just graduated high school and has had some struggles spiritually and otherwise that we're working through. It. My wife and I really struggled with how strict to be. Like I said, I grew up in a pretty strict environment. I've seen a lot of people that grew up in very strict homes kind of rebel and go crazy when they have some freedom, and we were hesitant. We just didn't want to do that. So I would say all of our kids are Catholic and will remain that way. But we certainly have not steered them I would say, in a very or super strict traditionalist mindset. We're kind of hoping that we've provided enough guidance that they will and have adopted it for their own when they get to be the right age.
You probably don't want to get doxxed, so you don't want to name your children, but I'm just wondering if did you choose Christian names for them, like the saint names of the saints?
Yeah, they're all Christian names. We had uh, we sort of I had a rule early on that I wanted our kids to have a full name and a short version.
Okay.
So our oldest son is Andrew, but he goes by AJ. So all of our kids have two variations in common.
Ah,
So
oh,
we have
that's
two,
smart.
yes, and so we have two A's, two A's, two J's, two T's, two R's, and an E at the end. So we have an odd one so far.
That's pretty cool. Any of them excited about their patron saints, like their namesakes?
Um,
They talk about that?
yeah, not. I guess not really. I guess that's not something that we emphasize. Now, our oldest son, who's in the military, has a devotion to Saint Michael. We've
Ah.
sent him with some stuff when he shipped out. So I think he has an affection for Saint Michael.
What's with Saint George? Is that a real thing or is that legendary? Is that a real saint? Saint
I
George.
don't know. I don't know.
Church doesn't say one way or the other.
If it does, I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
where that is.
That's another cool military style saint. There's also Saint Joan of Arc. If you had a daughter in the military, that would be a good good one.
That's right. Yep.
I really like her Saint Joan of Arc. She's a good one.
Hmm.
Let's dig a little bit into your bread and butter, like your podcast. I guess that's your main sort of Catholic hobby right now is the podcast. Is that safe to say?
Yes. Yep.
What's and you I think you told us in your bio the first name of your partner on the podcast. What's his name?
Jonah. Craig and
Jonah.
Jonah.
Ah.
That is not his real name. He's completely
Ah.
anonymous. This is my first name, but I don't tell everyone.
Okay. So Jonah, with air quotes, how'd you meet again? Remind me. You may have mentioned it briefly, but what's the story? Like he's on fire for the faith, obviously.
Yeah, he's so he's lives in our community. He grew up here and then went off to college and came back. We've known our kids started to go to school together, and I've probably known him for about 5-6 years. And to be honest with you, I have no idea how we even started talking about this stuff. Um, I think maybe we went fishing a couple times together or something like that. And we had started fishing and hunting a little bit together, and we would have some really good profound conversations. And I said, we should have a podcast. And this was probably a year and a half ago. And I kept kind of persistently telling him we really should, because we have a lot of fun talking together. Like, just good. He's got a really nice voice. I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit shaky today. I was at a MMA fight last night and I
Oh,
was
no
yelling and I
way.
can't talk today.
Which fight was it? What was it?
It's a local one here near us. So
Yeah, I've been to a couple of local fights here in Montreal. I'm in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and
yeah.
so we've got George St. Pierre. I didn't see him, but I mean, he's well beyond the local stuff here. But I was impressed. I was very impressed with the local fights that I saw, the mixed martial arts. It was like amazing. Like I saw a couple of knockouts, submissions. It was amazing. And I talked to the guys afterwards. They're so accessible, so cool,
Yeah, there's
really
water
nice
around.
guys. They love each other. They're respectful of each other. That's what I like about good sportsmanships. Now, there's the bad side, the drugs and all that sort of stuff with the testing, doping, whatever you want to call it. But it's like all professional sports. Like it's so sad when if you want to compete, you kind of have to say, well, am I going to be the only natural guy, or am I going to cheat a little bit, or like are there non-cheating gray areas? Like it's just it really sickens me and saddens me. And the other thing I want to say about mixed martial arts is the weight class thing bugs me. I think you should not have to cut weight. You should fight at your walk around weight, and you're weighed just before you get in the ring, and that's it. I don't want people cutting weight because it's not healthy, and it's sometimes it's even dangerous. So
Yeah, they had and I don't know any of these people. I was invited by a business friend of mine who had he was a sponsor and had VP level, and so we went, and there was a title fight, and the one guy sustained a pretty bad knee injury during it, so the fight was called, and the other guy was like, "Well, I want a rematch. Like, this isn't the way I wanted to win it," and I was really impressed by kind of what you said, the level of. I mean, most of them were pretty, friendly towards each other afterwards and hugging each other, and there's a certain level of, I guess, a code among them.
respect.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So,
pretty cool. So is it true? I know what you do for a living. Did you mention that yet, or are you able to talk a little bit about that or no?
no, I'm just I have a professional
Oh, you
occupation.
don't like to talk about it, right?
Maybe not today.
Okay, okay. Because that's a topic I'd like to dig into, but it's not a problem. I got plenty of other plenty of
Yeah,
other things to talk about, so that's not a problem.
that's okay.
I understand you want to keep it separate. So let's dig right into the podcast because my thing on my show is I like to discover, and I'm very blunt and I don't have a lot of tact, so I just basically ask whatever's on my mind, and most people roll with the punches. And if the things you don't want to talk about, that's fine. But I don't get to know my guest beforehand because I want to discover it. So I haven't gone and watched your podcast. So I'm going to be learning right now. Like I have an idea because you told me on Twitter. But tell me what is the main thrust of it, if you'll pardon the image, and what angle, where's the emphasis? Because within any subtopic within Catholicism, there are many nuanced approaches that you could choose to take. So what's your emphasis? What's your angle? What's your passion? What drives you? What are you excited about for the content of your podcast?
That's a good question. I mean, there's it's evolved. So I think about an hour ago or 2 hours ago, I think episode 146 or 147
Oh,
went out. And that,
wow. That's a
that
lot.
sounds, maybe sounds more impressive than it is. I mean, um, some of our episodes are 8 minutes, some of them are 12 minutes, some of them are an hour. Um, but when we originally started out, so this is sort of how our journey started. So I had this friend, and like I said, I was just deeply torn inside about this. I think like a lot of men, trying to be faithful. So let me back up a little bit. As I see it, I think a lot of people think that the church's teaching on birth control is the hard one. I actually don't think that's the hard part about it. Um, but being a faithful Catholic is hard because there's three components. Number one, no birth control. Most of us are using natural family planning or something like that. Number two, no masturbation, or depending on who you ask, other mutual acts. And number three, missteps or violations are at least potentially a mortal sin. So that three sided combination is really difficult. I think, especially for men. I think the abstinence that goes with it, at least I found it difficult, and uh, every guy that I've talked to that will talk about it says that it's difficult, and for many of us, it involves trips to the confessional to confess sins that I think are pretty common. I think like a lot of Catholic men struggle with masturbation, sometimes till they die.
What a way to die.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
kidding.
That's
I'm
your only
kidding. I'm
relief.
kidding.
So th- that so we started recording, and the first couple episodes we started making jokes about masturbation, and we were talking about the marital debt and this and that. And so one of the things that really kind of held us back when we decided to do this is we're both married and relatively happily married, although we all have some things that are difficult about it. And so we were really struggling with how to be kind of open and honest about it, but realizing that if our wives hear this, uh, I don't want to sleep on the couch any more than I already am for the sake of a podcast. So we really struggle to find the balance of talking freely and honestly, but also, uh, you know, we have our spouses listen to this, or we make it available to them. They've given up bothering to listen to it now, so which is good. Um, but anyway, so one of the first things we talked about, we had talked about masturbation a couple times, and my buddy's wife cornered him. She's like, "Why do you guys talk about masturbation? You don't do that anymore, do you?" And he kind of had a deer in the headlights look, and he's like, "Well, yeah." Well, so he got interrogated about it, and that led to a conversation that I think, well, she had no idea. She could not relate to that at all. Never been a problem for her, and I think that's true for a lot of women, quite honestly, especially married. Um, a lot of women, especially when you have children, could just go forever, could go months, years without it, and not really be all that troubled by it. Whereas men, at least for me and Jonah, a week, 2 weeks is a long time, and things start to get really frustrating. So that was sort of, we realized there was um, a perception barrier, an experience barrier between us and our wives that we just never talked about. Well, that led him and his wife to start talking about it, to the extent that she's like, "Well, why didn't you just ask for it more often?" so, but so anyway, so that led to a dramatic transformation in their marriage, where they started talking about these things and the struggles. And we realized that if that could happen for him, that there may be other people out there that um, are in similar situations. I think a lot of this is really difficult for us guys to talk about when we struggle. I think guys like to talk. I think the guys that will talk about it like to talk about it themselves as former masturbators, not present masturbators or porn users or whatever. Um, so anyway, so we started talking, and so this is one of the reasons why I'm keeping my identity sort of anonymous, although people that work hard can put it
Well,
together.
if they knew that you were a porn star, they'd be disgusted, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's a joke. It's not what he does for a living. It's not what he does.
Well, strangely enough, so So anyway, so we started recording months, and even in my marriage, not that I've ever had a bad marriage, but our marriage got better. There was room for growth because my wife would listen to some of the things that we talked about, male concerns that she's like, I never even thought about that. Like, I just not the way I look at things. So we started having growth. What happened? There was a 36-hour period in my marriage a couple months ago, that was very pivotal, where I got discovered doing the deed
Oh,
by my wife. That was horrific for her, and led to a conversation that was about 20 years overdue. When my wife and I got married, we had been married probably 6 weeks, 2 months, and I was one of these guys who, like, well, I don't want any secrets. I want my wife to know everything. And I told her, I said, well, sometimes I struggle with this, and she was not prepared for that, and she looked at me like I had an affair, like I was admitting to having had an affair or something like that. And uh, we never talked about the subject again, ever. Um, and This forced us to talk, and we had the same very scary conversation, and then ended up, like, it was a huge healing thing for our marriage, to the point where she had no idea what a struggle it is for men during periods of abstinence, and what a struggle it is if you deal with this sin in any capacity at all. How frustrating it is, and sort of embarrassing it is to go to the priest and go to confession, and you know, it's something I struggled with for 20 years. Um, that was transformational for our marriage, and so that's really what motivates us now. Our marriage, not that we're perfect, but is just it's like we're married to different people now, because she knows about this, and we talk about it, and our intimacy is different, and she cares about it, and she's cares about my salvation, and wants me to be happy and holy, and it's changed everything for us.
that's nice. I'm very happy for you. Very happy for you. I find it a little bit funny that, my audience is 99.9% male, but the only people watching this are two women.
Well,
I've got Emily, my friend Emily, and my friend Rebecca in the live chat. Hey, hello to both of you if you're still there. And so it's just kind of ironic, like this. We don't want the women listening to this
I,
particular episode, but
no, I
but it's okay. It's okay.
n- that's the irony about it. Most of my audience is men, but the people I really want to hear this are the women, to be honest, because most men are afraid to talk about
The
this.
struggle is real, women. The struggle is real. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
my wife, I'm very open with my wife, that I'm a
yeah.
sick pervert and horny and all this sort of thing. And um, she laughs it off. She knows what men are like. Like she's been around the
Okay.
block before we got married. So she knows what men are like, and she just thinks we're just pigs and just disgusting and whatever. So, she's very blunt, and she tells it like it is. She's Greek, so if
Okay.
you've met any Greek or Mediterranean women, just bang, they tell you what the way it is. But yeah, she knows I'm ashamed and that I'm trying not to be, a pig or whatever. But I do go to confession every week if I can. This morning I went. It's been 2 weeks. But if I go more than 2 weeks, then Satan really gets a hold of me. Because it's just so attract. I don't know if women know how attractive they are, but it's very, very powerful. And part of that's good, part of that's evil. Like the good part is God made them. They're beautiful and they are complementary to us in so many ways, and they're mysterious to us in so many ways, and that's all good. But that woman, the sexy woman I see on the street or on the billboard or whatever, it's not my wife. That's not my wife. So why objectify her? And my wife is a woman, a beautiful woman, and I can't objectify her. And just yesterday, I think it was, she came in to show me something, And I said, "Excuse me, you're." She was wearing some loose lingerie or something, and one of her boobs came out. I'm like, "Just letting you know." And she's, "Oh, okay." So, because she's got a certain sense of modesty too. But the thing about the good side, we know the ontological goodness of women and the mystery of women and all that. And then there's the dark side where Satan will use these good things to make us see the grass greener on the other side or something like that, or to think, well, I want it, so I'm going to fantasize about it or whatever. Like that's something I don't know if women realize, like how powerful our imaginations are as men. And I have like if I let myself get engaged with dark thoughts about sex, and when I say dark, I just mean it because it's not godly, it's not chaste. Then it can really snowball to the point where I'm getting involuntary visions and I'm getting like fantasies, and not to mention, and this is during broad daylight, like I could be if I let myself go like I did during COVID, I got so dark that even at work I was getting like flooded with these like high definition pornos basically in my head, even though I wasn't really watching pornography. I haven't been for decades or whatever, but um, just the power of the imagination. I don't know if this is something that you've examined on your podcast yet, but we're very visual. Men are very visual, and we're able to, and certainly Satan is able to, flood our minds with all kinds of really interesting scenarios and images and moving images. And I always know, and I talk about this often on my podcast, I always know when I find that interesting and exciting, even though I know it's evil and I should be rejecting that. I know when I'm just going along and saying this is interesting and playing along, and it's just sad and pathetic, like how weak I am. I'll speak for myself. I don't know about you, but how sad and how pathetic it is, how weak I am when just given a little bit of imagery of sexual intimacy. But I'll let you respond to all that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that I've never had that kind of problem. Maybe I'm just aging out. I don't know how old you are. I'm in my
I'm
mid 40s.
53,
Oh, I would not have guessed that.
and I'm still having wet dreams at my age. So, do you talk about wet dreams at all?
Yeah, we do. So we have a kind of a ongoing storyline that we have a lot of fun with the story of Onan.
Okay.
Uh, and but you know, I I don't know how many guys struggle with porn stuff. I mean, I think when I was younger, I would say that the imagination would run amok a lot more. Uh, I I don't have that, and I don't think Jonah had that, but I think what our personal struggle has been more, we're trying to be faithful Catholics. He doesn't have as many kids as I do, but we have families, and just when you're trying to do what the church teaches, and you're open to life, and I've been changing diapers for 20 years. I haven't
You're an
gotten
expert
I
diaper
haven't
changer.
I haven't gotten a full night's sleep uh, in that same time period, other than maybe when I travel for business. Um, but you're trying to find time for intimacy is just a real struggle, whether you're fertile or not. Um, and I think for a lot of people, the intimacy just tends to turn way down or become non-existent. For us, it was never that bad, but it was always spaced out much further than I would like. And so my struggle, I I'm grateful that I've never really had struggles with fantasizing about other women, but I think about my wife all the time, right? And the same thing with Jonah, but we just our wives don't have the same experience, and so I think like a lot of guys took matters into our own hands.
Wah, wah.
Uh, I, in I, and part of that was, so one of the things that we've really um, tried to emphasize in our podcast is this, that it's a common thing, not that we want to normalize it and say it's okay, but we do want to try and normalize the conversation about it, because I think a lot of people, whether it's a product of the purity culture or whatever, uh, to give you an example, I think the I think the podcast episode that we just dropped today was us responding to a recent video on Christopher West's podcast, the Theology of the Body Institute. And I don't know what your feelings are on him, but we spend a fair amount of time picking on Christopher West sometimes. Um, but the thrust of the video was that um, for men that struggle with porn and masturbation, that you need to tell your beloved at some point in time, and you need to be ready for them to feel very betrayed and all this and that. Um, at one point she said, in my mind, and this is her perspective, that those things are no different than adultery and infidelity. I really struggle. I think that's wrong. I think that's a mistake.
Well,
I
didn't
think that
Jesus say that?
well,
Didn't Jesus say that if you look at a woman with lust, you've committed adultery in your mind? I
I
believe
think
it 100%.
I think it's true on a theoretical level, but I think in practice, uh,
Yeah, the woman, I don't think the woman should have as strong of a reaction for sure. Yeah, for
that's my
sure.
point.
For sure.
That
Yeah, for sure.
that's our point. For me, for a long time, I was afraid to talk about this with my wife because she had a very, very strong reaction to it early on, and I think part of that was her sort of being prepared to view it that way. Um, and that's one of the things that we've really tried to break down is like I said, not to normalize it and say it's okay, but just, I mean, so a couple weeks ago we had Father Dwight Longenecker. Do you know who he is?
Heard the name. Yeah, I'm sure I've seen him around. Yeah.
Really cool guy. He's a married priest. He's a former Anglican who became a priest.
Right.
And so he came on our show. We had a really, really good, like, people should subscribe to my channel or go
Yeah.
to those videos,
Yeah.
because we talked about this and we prepped him in advance. We said, how common is this sin for men versus women? And he said, he has confessions every week. And he said, I would say 50% of men regularly confess masturbation and porn, Catholic men. And I said, well, what about the women? He said, 1 in 20. And that might be an overestimate.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So it's 5
uh,
versus 50. 5 versus 50. A tenfold increase for men. Yeah.
yes.
Or
Yeah.
more. Probably more.
Well, yeah. That's the guys that are going to confession and are caring about it, I
Have you,
think.
I mean, I don't know where you go to mass, but in my mass, the average age is 75. So like, I mean, there's probably a good reason why only 50% have the problem, right?
Yeah, we had some jokes about that. What are the other 50% just lying, or what's going on? Hopefully you age out of it eventually, but you know, so that because of that, because and so when this conversation came up with my wife, I said, "You ever, never." She's never once had to think about this, never had to go to confession for it, and I think that's a very common situation. And so we named the our podcast is called the Uncharted Catholic Man, and let me tell you the story of how that name came about. So I was listening to some podcasts, and they were both by Catholic women talking about natural family planning. And within a span of a week, they both made the comment that, well, no one ever died from not having sex. And I got to thinking, I said, I'm not sure, is that a feature or a bug? Because there's been times in my life that I would have picked death if I could have welcomed it in my life. To me, that represented a fundamental misunderstanding that people have including Catholic couples, practicing natural family planning, just have very different experiences, especially when it comes to abstinence. Most of us men, when you're in that period, are going to either struggle with this sin from time to time or regularly, or, in my opinion, going to be absolutely miserable if you can stand firm. For
I'm
what
sure you have a lot of jokes. You could write a book, just a joke book of
we
Catholic
we do.
masturbation jokes.
Yes.
Yeah. It would
Yep.
sell well. It would sell very well. It would sell very well. I do have a solution though. I do have a solution though for the disparity between men and women. I just want to inject this,
Yeah. Go ahead.
give you a little life hack. Okay, for the Catholic life hack. Women don't have this struggle. Men do. So
Yep.
what's the solution? We become women. We transition and I'm not David anymore. Now I'm Julie. Problem solved, right? Is that a good solution? Is that a Catholic solution? I'm being silly. I'm being silly.
I seriously looked at chemical or surgical solutions to this
Oh,
this
oh, there was a saint who did that. Not a saint, but there was a father of the church who did that. Was it Origen? He
I
castrated
don't.
himself. He castrated himself for the sake of the kingdom, I believe. And that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons he's not a saint. He took an extreme measure. It may have been Origen, or it may have been the other guy, who also is not a saint but a father of the church.
Yeah.
Can't remember his name right now. But anyway, I'll let you continue. You're in the middle of something.
It's okay. Um, when we what is the solution? I I don't know. I mean, for us, as a result of this conversation, my wife and I are just we've found a little different strategy for intimacy, and I'm of the mindset that if intimacy is more frequent, it becomes a non-issue for most guys. um,
What about single men, unmarried men? Do you have any? Have you
yeah,
put any thought into that at all?
we've started to think about it a little bit. I don't have any great thought because, uh,
Because you're only thinking about sex all the time? I'm kidding.
well, I'm trying. Yeah, I mean, I'm deeply in the married life, and so let me offer this. So one of the things that I struggle with is what do we, how do we look at these sex drives? Like, what, how much of this is? So I got into a
Psychological.
yeah. So biologically, men have a different hormonal experience. Our bodies do different things. Are pushing us towards that when we become mature. Uh, I sometimes wonder how much of our contempt for that is. I mean, I think we like to just blame it all on concupiscence, and I'm not so sure that. So, did Adam have wet dreams? Is that all a product of concupiscence, or is that biology?
Well, I personally feel like God meant it when he said, "Go forth and multiply." Like I think that we should marry properly in a proper, healthy marriage, but marry young. That means shortly after puberty. You have to be prepared, you have to be mature, you have to be Catholic, whatever. But it would be nice in an ideal world, which we don't live in, but if we're going to fantasize, might as well fantasize about an ideal world where everyone's Catholic and healthy and the families are nice and everything. And you get married young and you have lots of babies. That's what you did. That's what your brother did, right? Was your brother had 13?
Hmm.
So, I mean, my dad's one of 14, my mom's one of 7. So it's like, yeah, big families. I love big families, and I think that's the most natural thing. And porn and masturbation is demonic and evil and sick and perverted, and it's just not good, and you could end up in hell because of it. Now, I understand. I understand what your mission is. Your mission is to let's make it a healthy marriage and have openness and communication, and that'll actually relieve some of the tension, some of the stress, and some of the shame, and all these sorts of things. And then maybe there'll be less pressure, and you can have more workarounds for how to have intimacy when in a busy family life and these sorts of things. I can't relate to any of this because we don't have any children, but and I'm in an irregular marriage. so I'm not even allowed to have sex with my wife. So
Oh my.
that's a very it's a point of contention. It's one of the reasons she hates the Catholic Church. She's anti-Catholic because of this, because I converted from atheism and then said, according to the church, we have to live as brother and sister. So I've been doing that since 2009.
Wow.
So that's my situation. So if some of your buddies feel bad, just say, "Well, I met this guy David, and he's even in a shittier situation than you." So, so yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel bad for you. I mean, you know,
I get to do my purgatory now. It's like air mile points.
yeah, God bless you. I think a lot of people would, well, here's one of the revelations that I sort of had that led me to do this podcast is I was like, how, I realize that we Catholics, we that are like trying to be faithful to these teachings, you're trying to follow it in your situation. Those of us that are not in that irregular situation, but are allowed to be intimate and all that, you're trying not to, you're not using birth control. You're trying to do all these other things. I think it's a really, really difficult task. And when I say difficult, sometimes I think it's impossible. Like it's nearly impossible. Um, to the point that it caused me to start questioning at a bare minimum why. Like why do we teach these things, or why are these things so important? Why uh, is it possible that we have some of these things a little wrong? I don't know. I'm very scared about being a heretic, but w- we had a I thought we had a really, really good conversation with Father Longenecker, who was like, look, I respect the church's teaching, I follow it, but the real lived experience is much messier than that. And what do you do with that? And how do you shepherd people and pastor people? I mean, I will tell you from my own personal journey, I was at the point of despair, like spiritual despair, because I was like either this system of rules that we as Catholics are so impossible, like there's no chance I'm going to make it to heaven, or something's wrong. And if something's wrong, then we as Catholic, I don't think I'm allowed to believe that. So I really had this tension for a long time that was destroying my faith. um, Things have changed now. I mean, part of this is, talking about it has helped, but I still see a situation that is, you know, not even like questioning the teaching, but I sometimes think maybe it would help if we as a church better explain why. Like, why are these sins, or why is it so harmful if people do this? And for let me give you a more real world example that's not my situation, but I've talked to some people that are in this situation. People that for one reason or another, becoming pregnant would be a very, very difficult, if not life-threatening situation for them. And the wife has very irregular cycles or whatever. And so the question becomes, okay, no birth control, but what about Jonah and I call them other acts. I think most people can understand what we're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
when we say other acts. Okay. That actually, depending on who you ask, priests will tell different things about whether other acts are permissible or not. I think most people say they're not. It's not spelled out in the catechism. I got the catechism here. Got tab to 2352, which is the masturbation section, but it's not in the catechism. But there are people that have been instructed by their priests that you have to, well, I guess as you live like brother and sister, which is nothing. Uh, well, nothing
Nothing
that's
good.
going to
Nothing
result in an
good.
orgasm or something like that.
Well,
So,
like I told you, I do have wet dreams regularly. So
Well, okay, so
And I regret it. Yeah, I regret it. It's like I feel bad. I want to confess it, but it's not really a confessable sin. It's just like I can't. But well, no, it is, there is culpability because when I have wet dreams, usually it's because I've allowed myself to look or to think or whatever. And so, yeah, I do have culpability. Maybe I'm a hard liner when it comes to sexual sin, but I'm very, very, very convinced that it's demonic, it's evil, and it's hard to be pure and chaste. It's hard, and we can't do it. We can only do it by the grace of God. And so I think you probably don't like my vision of sexual morality because it's very, very rigid and very Catholic, old school Catholic. But that's it's a deal breaker for me. Like it's if Catholicism were to go your way, which let's go soft on sexual sin, I'd probably leave Christianity, because it's a deal breaker for me. I have to belong to a religion that puts purity and chastity, takes it very seriously. So just to maybe contrast where I'm at with where you're at, and not to say one's better than the other, we have our predispositions, we have our background, we have our baggage, we have our psychological baggage that we bring with us, right? But that's where I'm at. It's very, very, very important to me. And if you were to look at my mind and what a pervert I am, you'd say, well, what a hypocrite. Why are you making chastity and purity a priority when you're a sick dog? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But I know it doesn't make sense, but it's like, it's still very, very high priority for me. So, end of TED Talk.
well,
I just want you to know that if I'm smiling and nodding, I'm not necessarily agreeing with you. You know what I mean? Like, and it's going to be interesting, tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I've got Father James Martin coming on, and I'm really, really curious I wish you were here to be a third man in this conversation so I could sort of figure out, is he leaning towards you, leaning towards me? I think he's probably leaning a little bit towards you, where it's like, well, maybe it's not realistic to have the expectations that the church used to have, or this pie in the sky, idealized purity and chastity message is maybe unattainable. So I think there are a lot of people like that. I'm not in that camp, but I can't speak for Father James Martin. I'm going to ask him tomorrow, but we'll see. Stay tuned.
well, I'm guessing. I think I know where he lands on the
Yeah.
spectrum, but I don't want to
Yeah,
speak
if the
for him.
rad trads are correct, then we know where he stands, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to clarify here. I mean, I'm not sure that you and I are that much different.
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah.
I mean, I at one point I would say I was very much like you. I guess my situation now is such that having tried to live this life for 20 years, a married Catholic life for 20 years, and um, how do I say this? Like, I've struggled with this in ways that like nothing else is like I never struggled with anything else the way that
So
this.
your relationship with food, it may be sick and perverted, but nothing compared to, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
it's a
I
different league. It's like a different level of thorn in the side, right?
yeah, Jonah and I like to joke because we like to say, well, at least this sin, you know, when you've done it. Did I eat too many donuts is maybe more of a judgment call, but and let me just bring this full circle. So about 2 months ago, my wife, we had this very traumatic experience, and just for anyone that's listening to this and is, I don't know who's out there. Maybe I'm the only person in the world, or Jonah and I are the only people in the world that can relate to this. I suspect not. But if anyone wants that, like we recorded, like, so he and I recorded the next day and I told him the whole damn story. And then we recorded an episode where we talked about my wife and I having this very profound conversation that was, like I said, marriage changing. I will share those episodes with people if they want. I don't have them publicly available. I mean, they're it's very raw and unfiltered.
It's on the dark web, yeah.
Yeah, you can get to it. I will share it, especially if it's. I mean, I really want this message to be heard by the wives out there because there's a really good chance your husband struggles with this quietly or between him and his confessor. And for the men out there that do, I mean, I want to share that with other people. But since then, like I said, my wife and I, our marriage is very different, and intimacy is different, and this has been a complete non-issue. To the point where I was telling Jonah, I said it's really weird going to the confessional now because it's like
Got nothing to say.
it's strange. It's just I guess I have to
Look for other things.
look for other
Those
vices.
donuts, man. Those donuts.
So it, it's just I mean, I'm just so grateful. I mean, I am so grateful. And all it really took was this conversation that came up under very unpleasant circumstances, but it was the best thing ever happened to our marriage, and I want to share that with other people. For us, and for me, and for Jonah at least, it this type of issue became almost a non-issue for us because the intimate life with our spouse has changed so dramatically and positively. I don't know. That's not a solution for everybody. It's not obviously it's not a solution for you, I guess,
No.
but for a lot of people, it might be, or at least can make the burden easier sometimes. I have a lot of sympathy for people that are in your situation, or like I said, people that pregnancy would just be a very difficult um, thing. Where let's say they're asked to live as brother and sister for a year or more. I can't even imagine. I mean, here's my basic question I have about that is if statistically most of those men are masturbating and maybe the wives are too, like what is that doing? Like what are we saving people from if it's just going on anyway and he's racked with guilt and he's going to I just think that there's questions that I have about why we have some of these teachings that we do. Not that I'm asking to change them, but I think sometimes the explanation is not is not all that convincing, I guess.
Well, we're supposed to, don't forget that the church is a living thing. And if you've read the Code of Canon Law, the new one and the old ones, the priest is supposed to know all the families in his parish and care for their souls and be involved and, not so maybe so intimately with the bedroom stuff, but to a certain extent, just the general health and well-being of all the parishioners, Catholic and non-Catholic alike. So that's the ideal which is not lived out at all in my parish and in my province and in my country. It's not lived out. I've never seen that. And I've traveled to the US and you've never seen it in the US either. So I don't think it's actually happening. But the the big thing for me is that you know, there's the ideal and then there's the reality. And the reality, as everyone knows, is messy, it's ugly, and it's stinky. So whatever, we can idealize Jesus Christ and his church and we can turn it into some squeaky clean thing, which it is in heaven. But meanwhile, here below in the church militant in this fallen world, it's not yet pure, and that's an understatement, right? It's an understatement, especially if we want to talk about wolves in sheep's clothing. We want to talk about fake Catholics, bad Catholics. It's dark. It's very dark. The weeds among the wheat, but we're not to uproot the weeds. So it's like on the one hand, I live in a fantasy world where I'm just like constantly thinking about Judgment Day and heaven and will I make it? And God help me, please help me to make it so that I can be free from this life, which is a trial. But on the other hand, I am in the world, not hopefully not of the world, but to the extent that I dance with the devil, I am of the world, just sadly. If we were saints, let's put it this way, if we were saints, we wouldn't even be, we would be tempted, but we would not cooperate with the temptation. We would only choose to cooperate with the graces of God. But nonetheless, I'm in the world, and I have to work, which I hate, and I have to, go to the bathroom and do all these things which are not very dignified. And part of that, part of the embarrassment of being here is, having appetites which are not well ordered. They're disordered. I have disordered appetites with food, with sex, with everything. With how do I spend my time? How do I spend my time? It's a disordered appetite I have for how to spend my time. I'd rather do stupid, meaningless, time wasting stuff. Like just scrolling Twitter and watching street fights or whatever it is. Like it's just like nonsense. It's not good for me. I know it's not good for me. Why am I doing it? Oh, because I deserve to have a break because I worked hard today. What it's just like it's just a constant thing, you know. So all of this to say that it's very, very messy here below. And although I live in a fantasy world where, I'm gonna escape to heaven one day, and it's true, hopefully it's true. I do believe it. I do believe that heaven is real. I don't know for sure that I'm gonna go there, but I hope so. What's your take on that whole thing with heaven and hell? And, obviously it troubled you when you were struggling with your sexual temptation. Obviously it disturbed you a little bit that maybe your soul was on the line. So have you changed at all? Have you ever flirted with universalism or that maybe hell's not permanent or anything like that?
Well, two things. So, um, you know, so 2352 of the Catechism is very interesting, and that's the section on masturbation. And what's interesting about that section, the last paragraph, is sort of helpful and unhelpful at the same time. But it says to form an equitable judgment about the subject's moral responsibility and to guide pastoral action, one must take into account the affective immaturity, force of
Yep.
acquired habit,
Yep.
conditions of anxiety, or other psychological or social factors that can lessen, if not even reduce to a minimum, moral culpability.
For sure.
So I always thought that was interesting because I don't know whether any other place in the Catechism where the church talks about
Yeah.
an objective moral evil and says, oh, by the way, here's the circumstances that can lessen or almost eliminate moral culpability. Um, Again, that is in some ways reassuring, but also it's like, okay, well, why are we teaching it's an objective moral evil when the real lived experience, I think, for most people, it falls into that second paragraph somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's not all that helpful for the penitent, for the person, for the guy trying to make a decision, or gal, but let's just say guys trying to make a decision. And we talked about this with Father Longenecker. Um, and I says for most of us guys, if it happens or when it happens, we just err on the side of caution and we go to confession. Don't go to communion or something like that, and go to confession to take care of it. But that provision's there. But how it gets applied, or how we can potentially use that to make um, moral evaluations is not all that helpful. And I guess to what extent, if any, does that apply to other areas of sexual sin or whatever? I don't know. We've been sort of searching diligently for someone to come on and maybe help enlighten us. But you'd surprised, or maybe not very surprised, how unwilling priests are to come on a podcast and talk about
Yeah.
section 2352 of the Catechism. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I was seriously considering asking Father James Martin, like, are you a virgin? Have you ever masturbated? Do you masturbate today? Do you suffer from same-sex attraction? Like, I don't have a problem asking. I think it's just normal. But I understand people have their public figures and they have certain like they want to maintain a certain image, and maybe it's just not a good idea to go around like showing all your warts and just advertising the fact that you fart and burp and whatever. It's not necessarily the best career move. You know what I mean?
that was one of the reasons that Jonah and I started this podcast, is we realized that it's a very common struggle for priests and priests alike, that we all kind of go through, and but none of us really talk about. And the people that talk about it, by and large, like I said, are former masturbators who like to talk about how I kicked that habit, I
Uh-huh.
don't do
Uh-huh.
it anymore. But isn't all that helpful for the guys that are still struggling with that, still hoping
Yeah.
there's an end point to it? So we started talking about these things because we see, for a lot of guys, if you have any like, if there's people out there who've never done it, I have a lot of questions. I'd love to examine them. But for most people, it's happened. It's happened once. It happens every so often, and I we just we just don't really talk about, like I said, we don't normalize the conversation about it. I mean, it's talked about in the catechism. There's a catechism section on it. Like, it's okay to talk about it. Priests should be willing to talk about it, but they don't. So that's what we do. We're like, well, someone will talk. We'll talk about it.
Well, I'm definitely interested to check out your podcast for sure, now that I know that it's focused on these awkward questions. I did want to mention that I read recently somewhere, I don't know, about a saint who said, the point, the our focus is not just to reduce our sinning, like to stop sinning or to sin less. That's not the main thing, right? Like, it's part of the journey, to getting to heaven is part of the journey, to be perfect as I am perfect and these sorts of things. But there's another important component to it, which is often overlooked in my faith walk. I often think about, like, I even keep track on a daily spiritual journal about where I'm sitting, how much I'm sitting, what I'm sitting, venial or mortal or whatever. Um, so yeah, I'm obsessed with sinning less. Not doing a very good job, but I'm obsessed with it. But there's another component which I tend to brush over or forget about, which the saint reminded me of, and that is to grow spiritually, you know, to get deeper in the faith and to get deeper in your relationship with Jesus Christ and these sorts of things. So maybe it's a satanic trap to be obsessed with sin. Have you ever thought about that angle?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I know for me at least, this this whole topic led to near spiritual despair for me. I mean, I was seriously questioning my faith. I can't say I don't question my faith now, but um, you know, this I don't know. Is that the devil? Is that just my mind?
Mm.
Um, you know, as far as the hell, like universalism and stuff like that. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that until recently. There's something attractive about it. I mean, here's one thing I will say. Um, you know, the sexual appetite is unlike anything else. Like, um, I mean, and it's similar to the desire for food, but it's more intense. I did an episode the other day. I said, look at the irrational things humans men will do to satisfy their sexual appetite. Like, risk their careers. They'll have affairs. They will, we're making sex dolls. Like, all these things that people will do to satisfy this craving that we have, whether it's nature tainted by sin, how that whole blend works out, I'm really not sure. But it's an appetite that is beyond anything else, especially for men. And you know, and I struggle with the idea, like, how much culpability, or how much consent do people give when they fall into these things or fantasies and stuff like that. Like, again, I'm not here to say that none of that stuff matters, but I think our capacity to say no to those things is simply different than my capacity to follow the second commandment or the first commandment or the third commandment, whatever. Like, I've never been tempted to go out and have an affair. I've never missed. I mean, I've never had a struggle missing mass. Like, I can't say I've never used the Lord's name in vain, but like, these other commandments, like this particular appetite that we have is so strong that I sometimes I wonder what to do with that, especially when you have the catechism saying, well, yeah, it's an objective moral. If you do this knowingly, freely, whatever, you're spending eternity in hell. So a person, you got a saint that lives an impeccable life. They masturbate one time, don't go to confession, and that person is going to spend eternity in hell. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
my mind, uh,
For
I mean, I get
sure.
the logic of it, but that creates a paradox in my mind that I can't I
Well,
can't go there and think about that.
the fall
'Cause,
from grace when a saint, you're talking about a pure, chaste, by the grace of God, pure and chaste saint,
mhm.
falls from grace and deliberately masturbates. To me, that's like Satan. That's like Satan. He was the most bright and beautiful and pure, and he just fell. Like he fell the hardest and the farthest because he was so great. If any saint, if you tell me about any saint that said, for whatever reason, okay, I'm just gonna indulge myself in this once for deliberately, knowingly. Yeah, I think if he or she is not repentant about it, yeah, you're done. You're toast. Like you screwed it. And there are stories about great men who fell from grace, like King Solomon. That's a good example, I think. I don't know the full story. I can't claim to know the full story, but um, I'm very sobered by different stories of people that fell from grace. And I've talked to ex-Catholics who became atheists primarily because they wanted to have sexual license. And to me, it's like you're a loser. You chose the easy path and it's the wrong path. And I'm sorry, like if you don't get right with God, you're doomed. And like, I mean, I don't despair of their salvation because the church forbids me to despair of their salvation. God has a plan, God loves this person, and there's going to be a path back, hopefully, but it's all up to the free will of the individual involved. So yeah, for me, like just the tragedy of sin, um, I've read stories where the saints did much, much less grave things than deliberately masturbating. And, there's stories where, like, the saints write books telling stories about how someone fell and ended up in hell, and how people, or even people in purgatory who explained how easy it is to offend God, and certainly those who are damned regret it. That's one of the main pains of hell, right? Is just the regret, the remorse. And the one thing I would like to sort of offer as counterpoint to your whole emphasis is that it's better to struggle, and it's better to be humble in our struggle. And like I struggle and I just keep going to confession. And it's better to struggle, it's better to fight the good fight, and it's humbling. And I think that's the main project, is to be humbled. Right? It's to be humbled. So if I suddenly got soft on myself about sexual sin or any other sin, if I suddenly took a softer approach on myself, I would necessarily be less humbled and more proud, because I'm naturally very, very proud. So I need to be humbled. And if I go soft on myself, I'll be less humbled. I'll be just more flying straight to hell with my pride and everything like that. So I just wanted to offer that as a sort of a little bit of pushback. Like, we have to struggle, and it's humbling, and we should be humbled.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I don't find that all that satisfying. And this is just my own personal observation. I struggle with the idea that God humbles us with things that He also says are objectively immoral actions that will send cause you to spend eternity in hell. That's the part of it that in my mind, I can't reconcile all that, and I'm not sure where. I mean, I'm not here to say any of the church's teachings are wrong, but I am here to say that in my own lived experience, some of these teachings are like, I accept them because the church says it, but they really don't have a logical. There's no logical explanation from it that I can see, and maybe that's just my own human weakness. I mean, I'm willing to accept that, but I'm not going to just say, yeah, it all makes perfect sense. I get that, because it doesn't. Like that. That doesn't make sense to me as a rational human being.
Yeah, I didn't really complete my thought earlier when I was talking about how the church is a living thing, and although, on the ground, pragmatically, we're not seeing what's outlined in canon law, we're supposed to be connected with the church in a very tangible, pragmatic way, where, like, for example, when I go to see my priest and I talk to him before Mass, I do confession, and, he gives me advice, and he supports me, and he encourages me, and he gives me my penance, and, he's on my side. Like, he's on my side. And he's not telling me, no, David, don't worry about it. He's saying, yeah, let's keep fighting. Let's keep fighting, and make sure you stay away from the near occasion of sin, this, that, and the other thing. Okay. So there's a living contact we have. it's not just about the dusty book on my shelf and what my book said and what what they said in the past and these sorts of things. It's like in my life, I have the church. I have my priest. I even met my bishop. I've met a couple of bishops here, and we have we can listen to our Holy Father. And he actually was in a Hulu documentary called The Pope Answers. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Hmm.
he's very, very soft. Like, I mean, I'm sure you would love it because he's meeting with like prostitutes, whores, and people who are atheist, and he's just very, very gentle and kind to them. Even when they're describing like sexual stuff they do, their masturbation, everything like that, he's not condemning. So this is a living church, and the vicar of Christ is very, very, very kind and gentle and soft with people. He also says, everyone's welcome, but you have to follow the rules once you're in. And this is like the LGBT community was kind of like, what? I thought we said we could come in. What? Now we have to follow the rules. So it's like I always describe it, it's the iron fist in the velvet glove. That's Pope Francis. It's like treat people like humans. They have dignity and support them, love them. First and foremost, make sure that you have the smell of the flock and that you're connected with the people, and make sure that we build each other up and we don't attack each other or condemn each other. We don't get sucked into ideologies like the right-wing Catholics and the left-wing Catholics too. But in charity and love, with our faith and our hope, we're going to keep our eyes on the prize, and always with a smile and always with joy. And I think he's a saintly man because he has that balance between the mercy and the justice. He doesn't talk about the justice too much, but I know it's there. I know he believes. I know he believes. And I'm hoping it's the same, and I believe it's the same with Father James Martin. I think he's a Catholic too, but I'll find out tomorrow. I'll get a vibe anyway. But I believe I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's a Christian man, a Catholic man, and he believes all the scary stuff about God's justice, but he's emphasizing the good stuff, the mercy and how to accompany, and sin is not a big deal because I often say on my podcast, sin is not a big deal. God's mercy is a big deal. That's a big deal. So let's not get obsessed with, despair and oh, I'm such a sinner. It's like your sin's not a big deal. You know, your past sins, your next sin is a big deal. Yeah, the one you're planning right now, that's a big one. I always emphasize that. So I'll let you respond to that, and then we'll start wrapping things up here soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I see where I am now, and I'm not even sure how I would identify myself. I mean, I think I mentioned it before. I consider myself a recovering traditionalist. I don't really don't want to. I'm not here to badmouth trads. I mean,
That's my job.
I have a lot of affinity. I have a lot of affinity for traditional Catholicism, and it does run in my veins. But um, there is the, like you said, I think there is oftentimes, and when I was in that camp, I really emphasized the rules and the judgment, and did not have a sense of the mercy of God. But I didn't really struggle with these kinds of things. When it became a struggle, I became even like I guess more sympathetic to people that find it not just difficult, but heroically difficult to sometimes follow everything that we're told to believe as Catholics. And I have a strong heart because God did humble me, I guess, through this process of understanding that despite our best efforts and despite a lot of effort and sincere effort, sometimes this is part of our life, and it does humble you. And so I'm I'm growing in my respect for Pope Francis and what he offers, because I definitely did not feel that way when he first came on board. And so um, I tend to get less and less interested in church politics as I get into this. I just like I don't know. I see talks of schism and all that, and well, I wouldn't say I don't care about it. I'm trying to raise my family. I'm trying to be a good Catholic myself. I got kids that are now adults. They're going to be moving on to the next stage of their life. I've got younger kids that I want to instruct better than I did my older kids, and so that's where my emphasis is at. And so my heart is very much, at least right now, for the Catholic married man, and wife out there that are trying to be faithful, but sometimes find these things difficult, or it feels like it's impossible. That's the people that I have a strong heart for now, and that's what we're trying to reach in our podcast. And so I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I'm certainly grateful for you giving me a chance to talk about what we're doing here.
Yeah, well, you'll come back. I hope you come back and just talk about developments and guests you've had on and things you've learned, anything like that. You're always welcome to come back. It's been a joy talking with you and meeting with you. And we could talk a little bit in the future, maybe about how you would talk to a teenager who's struggling, a man, like a young man who's struggling with pornography. It's so easy now with the phones and everything. It's just like, I'm so happy. I'm so happy I wasn't exposed to the technology because I was born in 70. Okay, so I mean, I had computer pornography starting in 1985, 86
Hmm.
because my father had a computer and I was talking to my wife today. I showed her because there was this image that was on the screen that was made up of alphanumeric characters, but it painted a picture of a dog, but it's just a bunch of ampersands and
Yeah,
whatever. And I said, this is like the first porn that I saw in the 80s. It was so
yeah,
exciting. It
yeah,
was on a green screen. I saw like this woman with her half of her clothes off, and it just formed out of alphanumeric characters. But so yeah, I was exposed to pornography early. I was like 15 years old or whatever. Um, but not like today. Like not like today. Wow, what a challenge. What a challenge. And I know the power of pornography and images generally. And I know my weakness. So I'm not going to blame anyone. I'm not going to browbeat a young kid who comes to me and admits that he's struggling because, wow, it is impossible. I think it is impossible, certainly today. So yeah, I have a lot of sympathy, and I would never, you know, come down hard on someone uh, because they find it impossible. I would just agree with them, like, yeah, it is impossible, and let's pray and strive and step by step, baby steps. It's like any other addiction, I guess. But it's heavy stuff.
yeah. I think one of the things that we kind of decided early on was that, and we talk a lot about, because his kids are a little younger than mine are, um, and maybe the ship has sailed a little bit on some of my older kids, but you know, I realized that for me to have a good, helpful relationship with my kids, or give instruction to them, I needed to have a healthy um, relationship with this issue and in my marriage. And so I think for a I think for a lot of couples, they need to have this open conversation. Hus- Husbands need to share with their wives need to be able to share and hear from their husbands, and be on the same page there, and then decide, how do we communicate this to our kids? When's the right time? We've been talking about doing some videos of how to introduce this to the next generation. I don't have the answer. I'm not sure what the answer is, but we're starting with ourselves. We're starting with our marriages, and then hopefully the next step will be to start finding good practical ways. Like I said, I don't know that going back to the Baltimore Catechism and memorize it, that's not going to cut it. I don't think in today's world. I think we're going to have a more updated sense for how we instill right and wrong in our children, and how we help them deal with it when they very likely fall into this stuff at some point. Anyway, that's the part that I hope that Father Martin and the Pope Francis and those out there are genuinely trying to tackle those issues, because that's a difficult issue. It's very moving very fast with technology and AI and all this stuff. I don't know. I can't keep up.
Yeah, well, I have some people whispering in my ear saying on the right saying, "Well, David, you have to do your homework, do your research on Father Martin, and you have to nail him. You have to ask this, you have to ask that." And I'm just thinking, no, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. I don't want to do that. That's not my style. That's not my style. There are plenty of people that are ready, able, and willing to do that. That's not my approach. And I am more sympathetic. Like, wow, what a ministry! What a ministry to take on! Wow, wow, what a courageous ministry! Wow. So I'm in awe, I'm in awe of someone who cannot take the easy route, which would be to look down your nose and condemn. That's the easiest thing to do. It's the easiest thing to do. And I love perverts of all kinds. It doesn't matter if you're gay, trans, whatever. Even if you're a pedophile, God loves you, Christ died for you, and let's try to protect our vulnerable. Okay, like let's here in Canada, the prime minister is trying to kill the young and the old with abortion and euthanasia and voluntary medical suicide. So like I'm not cheering on Prime Minister Trudeau, who's Catholic. I'm not cheering him on to try to kill the most vulnerable among us. I want to
Yep.
protect the vulnerable. But I love Trudeau in spite of his errors and his mission to kill everyone. And we can use education, and I'm going to protect myself and my family, small as it is, from any sort of medical tyranny or anything else. Certainly, if they start signing us up for suicide, I'm going to fight that one. But I'm exaggerating a little bit the way they're coming after us. But the point is that we live in a sick, fallen world, and even those who are claiming to be Catholic often are listening to the enemy, and they're promoting very, very dark stuff, very, very dark stuff, sexual perversion and everything like that. But my point here is that without smiling on sin, I can at least um, try to be charitable to the sinner. And it's that old idea, the hackneyed phrase of love the sinner, hate the sin, which I stand by. I mean, it's hard to practice that, but it's like so many Catholic truths, you might get cynical and jaded and just say, well, it's impossible. It's impossible to love the sinner and to hate the sin because the sin is so disgusting, especially with pedophilia, right? Like the sin is so disgusting. But again, yeah, it is impossible, but we have to die to self and live in Christ, and Christ does love the pedophile. And I'm using that example just because it's the most shocking and the most horrifying. And if someone, God forbid, it's scary even to think it or to say it, but if God forbid someone were to touch one of your young children, I would not blame you. And I might secretly applaud you if you hunted him down and tortured and killed him. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It would be going against, the Christ who's supposed to be in me. It wouldn't be good, but I'd be my human side would be like, okay, time for some village justice. So it's very complicated. It's very
Yep.
complicated.
We're complicated creatures.
Would your wife agree to come and talk to me on my podcast? Because I'd love to hear her side of this story. I'd love to hear her side of the story. I always say that to all my guests, but you in particular, I really mean it. It would be great to hear her side of the story. Do you think is she too shy, or is she willing to come and talk to me?
I've barely been able to get her on our podcast.
Ask her anyway. Just ask her anyway, and she'll say no, and you can just let me know. But it would be
I,
fun.
I will, and I because I think her experience, sort of be on both sides of this issue, has been very enlightening. Like I said, if you follow the channel, so if you go in my contact and email me, if people want access to those, I will share that. And it's some of it is her. We're reading her email to me and exchanges we had about kind of how this felt for her to see this and experience this. Um, she's just not quite ready yet to talk about it, but I hope that maybe others will come out if there's some other ones out there sees this video, um, because it's too important for us all to just go along and struggle quietly and no, we just think we're alone or we're too embarrassed to talk about it.
Yeah.
I I feel compelled to share this because it was a very embarrassing thing for me, but the fruit that it bore for our marriage has been so wonderful that I feel like I owe God that much to share this very embarrassing event in my life. So I'll see. I'll see if I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
get her
yeah.
on. And
Well, you can
I
tell
would
it.
love to come on and talk to you more
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, tell your wife because I always ask all my male guests, can invite your wife on, and one or two have, yeah, a couple have, and it's always wonderful. But let your wife know I'm not going to be talking to her about masturbation and guys stuff, you know? I'm going to be talking to her about how are you raised and what, how did you come to the faith and what's your journey and this sort of thing. If she wants to share about that stuff, that's fine. But that would not be my emphasis. My emphasis would be who's this woman? What's her
Yep.
story? What how did what was her perspective on meeting you, having kids? What's her perspective on all that sort of good stuff? So very nice to meet you. Thank you so much. You'll come back again. And I hope you'll check out tomorrow night's episode where I talk to Father James Martin. I'm really excited about it.
I will, and I'm glad that you're having him on and that you're approaching it that way. I mean, I think there could be some very valuable insights that come out of that. So, God be with you.
Thank you so much. Please pray for me and mine. I always enroll all my guests in a perpetual mass. So you and your family, all 11 of you or whatever it is, plus the parents. So that's a whole bunch of you are going to be getting these graces till the end of time. So if you do end up in purgatory, God forbid, then these graces will continue to help you there. Okay.
All right.
So just pray for me and mine. I'm like the only Catholic in my family, and my wife's anti-Catholic, so it's a challenge. And you've heard a little bit about my story, so
Yep.
it's not easy. It's a challenge. So I would appreciate your prayers. Okay.
I will do that.
Thank you so much, my brother. I love you, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, David.
Bye bye.
Bye.